So without further ado, I want to introduce to you, and I hope you'll give a warm first press welcome to Dori Burgess.
I'm not entirely sure. I think my other microphone works too, so maybe I'm loud enough? My husband would tell you that no one has ever accused me of being quiet, so I'm probably loud enough. Thank you guys for having me. Again, I'm Dori Burgess. I'm with the Program Director for the Alzheimer's Association serving your area, and I wanted to thank you all for having me for dinner. I usually don't eat meals before I speak, and the reason is that I did one time, and then I did the whole presentation, was happy, got in my car, flipped down the visor, and there was a big piece of spinach in my teeth, and it had been there the entire time. And no one told me, and I thought they were nice people. But I saw the look of the food tonight, and I made an exception, and I don't regret it. So thank you all for having me tonight. So again, I mentioned I'm with the Alzheimer's Association, and having said that, I didn't say Old Timers Association, which if you want to know how to get on my nerves, say, oh, you're Dori and you work for the Old Timers Association. No, it's Alzheimer's. And I know that oftentimes we hear the words Alzheimer's, and we hear the words dementia, and we hear them used interchangeably, and we don't often know what the difference is. Does this happen? So tonight I'm going to ask you to play a game with me, and in order to demonstrate the difference between these two things, we're going to start with the word vegetables. I have a piece of paper here, and I have written the word vegetables at the top very big, and if you guys could shout out some names of vegetables. Squash. I love that we're shouting out what we've had tonight. Squash, carrots, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, tomatoes, broccoli, green beans, okay, y'all are really fantastic at this game, but I'm going to ask you to stop. Can only write so much. So, okay, what I got down, there were a lot of great suggestions. Here's what I got written down. We have squash, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, lima beans, spinach, broccoli, tomato, carrots. Are those all, in fact, types of vegetables? No. If you're going to argue the semantics of a tomato, let's just stop. Let's pretend that a tomato is a vegetable and indeed not a fruit. Okay, so all vegetables, right? Yes. So do they all taste the same? No. Do they all look the same? No. Do they all grow in the same manner? But you would argue, with the exception of a tomato, in a court of law, say you were in the Johnny Depp trial right now, and you had to argue in a court of law that these are all in fact vegetables, you would probably do that, right? Because they all fall appropriately under that heading, being vegetables. They just manifest in different ways. So vegetables is the heading. So if we were to do a similar activity to explain the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia, we would take a piece of paper and we would write dementia at the top. Because dementia is simply the heading. Dementia is simply a loss of cognitive functioning. And under that heading, there can be many different types of loss of cognitive functioning. Now, we most commonly associate dementia with a loss of what? Memory. How many of you have seen Finding Dory? Or Finding Nemo? My name is Dory, like the fish. So about 47 times a week, I get the joke of, oh, you're Dory, you can't remember things and you help people that don't remember things. Okay, it was funny the first 47 times. It's not funny anymore. It lost its humor. But when people make the joke, I usually say, you know, dementia is not all about memory. The loss of cognitive functioning is everything that your brain does for you in a day. So that could be logic and reasoning, emotional and behavioral control, navigation. How many of you drove here tonight without using a map? How'd you know how to do that? your brain stored it for you and processes all your navigational process. So dementia is a loss of those functions. And under that heading, we could list many different types of dementia. We might talk about vascular dementia for people who've had significant heart issues. We might talk about Lewy body dementia. And if you don't think you're familiar with Lewy body dementia, who's familiar with the comedian Robin Williams? Robin Williams suffered from Lewy body dementia. Parkinson's disease can lead to dementia. We could talk about the various forms of dementia under that heading all night long, but what do you think is the most common form of dementia? Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia under that heading. It accounts for 70% of all cases of dementia. So, my name badge says the Alzheimer's Association for that reason, but did you know that the name of our organization is actually called the Alzheimer's and Related Dementia Disorder Association? But that is a lot to fit on a name badge. So we are called the Alzheimer's Association, but we help people with all types of dementia. And the packet that you have tonight, hopefully you have a packet. If you don't, please share with someone. Also, there's a sign-in going around. That's how people know I'm working and not shopping. But tonight you're going to see in your packet that we are going to talk about communication. Because we are here in a church family, you guys are a part of a congregation in which you meet and care about one another. Statistically speaking, at some point, you are going to encounter fellow church members, neighbors, family members, loved ones who experience some type of dementia. And I know that to be true because currently there are 95,000 South Carolinians living with Alzheimer's disease and 5.8 million Americans. So just statistically speaking, you're going to encounter this. What I hear sometimes from church members is this. I didn't go see them. I didn't visit them because I didn't know what to say. Or I didn't think they would remember me. Or I didn't want to make them upset. So I hear that as a barrier to communication when we have fellow people in the congregation that are experiencing this difficulty. So what we want to do tonight is we want to understand communication and how it changes in early, middle, and late stage of this disease process. So hopefully by the time I'm done talking, I love that slide loves to skip forward. It's fun. Okay, we're going to explain each stage's communication changes. We're going to talk about verbal and behavioral messages that are common, that you will most likely see or encounter. And then we're going to talk about strategies to make our interactions easier for them and for us. That's important, particularly if you're a caregiver. It's important that we make our day easier. So when we talk about early, middle, and late stage, remembering that these are broken apart because these changes are happening in the brain. At each different stage, it looks different, and communication is going to be different. So let's talk about exactly what's happening in the brain with Alzheimer's disease. All of us have been gifted with this wonderful brain in our heads, and each one of us have 100 billion neurons in our brain cells, 100 billion. And all of them are connected together. It looks like tree roots under a microscope. We call it the neuron forest. So with Alzheimer's disease, a plaque begins to build up around the neuron. The plaque is called beta amyloid protein. It's sticky. The cell can't shed the plaque. So ultimately what happens is the cell begins to shrink and the connections to the other cells breaks apart. So what happens is initially the cell is dying, but then the brain experiences shrinkage. This is why somebody that's an average adult human is going to have about a 3-pound brain weight. But in late stages of Alzheimer's disease, you're looking at a 2-pound brain weight. We're going to lose a full pound of brain weight during the disease process. That's going to change communication. And that's why we as caregivers need to understand it. So in early stage, you'll notice that people obviously can still convey thoughts and feelings through language. They still have access to language, and we should use it. People are at this point able to make decisions about their future care and should be tasked with making decisions about their future care. It's not a fun topic, but it's an appropriate topic, and we actually do a whole program on how to start that conversation with your loved one about future care. But you'll notice in early stage that people may begin misinterpreting what others say, and it does make conversations a little more cumbersome. In middle stage, people begin to use more basic words and sentences. They're going to start relying on tone of voice, body language, and things like that more, and we're going to break that down. And they're going to need connection through emotion. And we're going to talk about how to use the 5 senses in middle and late stage. So let's go ahead and jump into early stage. In early stage, you'll notice that people have difficulty finding the right word. That just may look like someone taking a little longer to speak and respond. Even if you're talking about something that they're incredibly interested in, it may just take a little longer for that conversation to flow in the way that it normally would have. People may begin to withdraw from conversation, and you'll notice that people struggle with decision-making or problem-solving. The reason why we struggle with decision-making and problem-solving pretty early is that plaque that I told you about, the beta amyloid protein plaque, it starts in the short-term memory. And then it works its way through the brain. So short-term memory is what we use to be able to do problem-solving and decision-making. And if you don't have access to your short-term memory, that becomes increasingly difficult. This is why someone can tell you everything in their long-term memory, what they were doing 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, but they struggle to tell you what they had for breakfast this morning. It's because the plaque starts in the short-term memory. So remember that problem-solving becomes quite difficult. How many of you struggle with what you're going to have for dinner every night? I mean, yes. What a privileged problem that is, right? We're very blessed to have that problem, but because there are so many options, it's a hard decision. And remembering that as this disease process goes on, we need to start limiting options. You're going to hear from Martha. Martha is our Associate Director of Research at the Home Office, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about early stage.
Communicating in the early stages of dementia with the person with the disease is important. At that time, you still have language as a tool, so you can learn things about what they might prefer as the disease progresses. For example, as the disease progresses, a person might have difficulty finding words. Caregivers often struggle to know what to do in that moment. Early on in the disease, you can ask. You can say, if you ever have trouble coming up with the word, would you rather that I jump in and give you the word, or do you want me to wait and allow you some time so you can find it on your own?
Notice that Martha says to ask. What we don't want to do is assume we know what the person was going to say. And I can't tell you what they say about people who assume because I'm at church, But you know what it is. Okay, just making sure we all know the saying. So we have to be able to ask directly. When we ask directly with communication, that means that you ask, do you want me to fill in or do you want me to wait? Or do you want me to just not say anything at all and let you do you? We need to keep sentences clear and straightforward. I know that you guys can tell by my accent that I've lived in South Carolina all my life. I'm from a booming metropolis in the northern part of the state called Inman, South Carolina. It's a big deal. And in Inman, South Carolina, we use a lot of idioms. We use a lot of metaphors. And as a matter of fact, I had a lovely woman who came into my office, told me a story that she had taken her mother to Inman First Baptist Church. Her mother is in early stage. Similar situation to this one. They're having a meal at the fellowship hall. The preacher comes over to speak to them. And she says, Mama, you're so sweet. You would just give him the shirt off your back. So what did Mama do? She gave her shirt to the preacher in the middle of the fellowship hall. There's a time and a place, y'all. That's not it. So we need to be sure that we're keeping sentences clear and straightforward. What that means is we're going to have to stop using so many prepositions and pronouns. So taking it back to second grade English class, what does that mean? That means instead of saying, put that over there, what is that and where is there? We have to get more specific, particularly if we're asking to complete a task, because tasks are becoming more complicated as the plaque runs its way through its course in the brain. So I need you to put the purple marker on the brown table. Thank you. clear and straightforward, leaving plenty of time for conversations. And if you guys have driven on any interstate anywhere recently, you know that humans are always in a hurry. But slowing down is important, particularly if someone's asking you a repetitive question, which is common. So instead of falling for the pitfall of "don't you remember," which are 3 words you should never use, you remove those from your vocabulary, because "don't you remember" is an accusation of failure. So instead, you treat every question like a new question, and you leave time, and that's important. In addition, include people in conversations that are talking about their own future, particularly if they're in front of you. Nothing frustrates me more than when clients come into my office and someone has just been diagnosed in early stage, and the caregiver begins speaking to me like their loved one isn't there. And that's typically when I ask the caregiver to leave the room so that I can speak to their loved one directly, because it is now their time to talk about what they want for their future. So including them in those conversations is critical. Also, we already talked about avoiding making assumptions and speaking directly to the person, but we also need to communicate in the way that is most comfortable for them. I was the direct caregiver for my grandfather who experienced dementia, and because I worked every day, I wanted to call him on the phone. I wanted to check on him for my peace of mind, right? But communicating over the phone was becoming increasingly difficult for him. He couldn't hear me very well, and he couldn't judge my expression so that he could read my body language and my pitch and my tone as well on the phone, so he would get frustrated. And then I would get frustrated, and we had bad interactions. So I had to start meeting him in an interaction that was more comfortable for him, which when I was at work was email. He liked the written word, and he would write me back. And then after that didn't work so much, I had to rely on more frequent visits or asking someone else to drop in. So remembering in early stage, honesty and laughter is important. I'll flip that on its script in a little while. But honesty is important in early stage, and so is laughter. I have a great friend called Gary. Gary's been living with Alzheimer's disease for 13 years. He came into my office before COVID, sat down with his wife, we had a great conversation. He's leaving, and he says, "I'm going to Barnes & Noble. We're going out to Barnes & Noble." I said, "Oh, you're going to go get a book?" And he said, "Why would I get a book?" And I was like, "I don't know, Gary, because that's what they sell at Barnes & Noble." And he said, "I could read the same book every day, and it would be a new book. I only need one book." And he laughed and laughed, and I laughed with him, because this disease is dark enough. When your loved ones, when your friends, when your family want to laugh with you, laugh with them. It's important, because the heavy is coming, right? So you'll also notice that middle stage is going to take up a lot of the slides in this program, because middle stage is the bulk of the disease process. It's where people hang out for the longest amount of time. So in middle stage, you're going to notice that people have increased difficulty with word finding. How that might look is that an individual might start using familiar words repeatedly. An example of that is that I might call a phone a remote. I might also call a calculator a remote. I might also call a garage door opener a remote. I might call anything that looks similarly electronic a remote. Also, I had a gentleman who was an avid gardener. Everything became a stick. His medicine bottles were sticks. So you may notice that people invent new words to describe familiar things. My grandfather, I came into his room after I had to place him at a facility. And I came in and he said, "I've been waiting for you to get here. I really need you to fix my curtain bag." Curtain bag. I was like, okay. So I walked over to the curtains and he said, "What are you doing?" And I was literally like, I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing. So I would just sort of walk around the room in kind of like a hot and cold game until his frustration settled and I got close to him. I realized that a curtain bag was a pillowcase. His pillowcase had slipped off the pillow. It's a bag, it's a linen, it started to make sense. So you may have to decipher things that you may not once have had to decipher. People are going to easily lose their train of thought and speak less frequently. And they're going to start communicating through behavior rather than words. This may be exhibited in frustration, agitation, a little bit of anger. Because have you guys ever wanted to communicate something and a feeling, an emotion, somebody wasn't understanding it, and what happened? You got a little frustrated because you're trying to convey a thought. And of course, because those connections are breaking apart, it becomes increasingly difficult. If you notice that someone has sudden changes overnight, rapid changes, this may indicate a physical problem. They may have a urinary tract infection. They could have pain that they can't relay to you. So it's important that you seek medical attention right away. We're going to hear from Beverly, who is a caregiver for her spouse.
I would advise couples, and I usually do advise the caregiver who comes to the group and is caring for spouse, that you take your time. Always count to 3 before you respond, because it gives you time to think about your answer and what's going on. Generally, in a marital dispute, it's quick. It's back and forth. You're quick to give an answer. When they've been diagnosed, to sit back and say, okay, you're supposed to be the one that's reasonable here. Let's change how we do this, because there's only one thing you can control, and that's you. You cannot control them and their process.
So it's important that what Beverly says, and she's talking about us changing and adapting because they are no longer able to change and adapt. And we're going to demonstrate this through something we call positive physical approach. Now, when I talk about positive physical approach, I usually like to start to pick on someone. And I'm kind of bound with the microphone. I usually like to wonder, no, that doesn't work good. So, okay. Ma'am, there in the red, what is your name? Summer. I'm sorry, say it one more time. Summer. Summer? So, okay, Summer's here. She looks nervous. But let's just imagine I look at her and I say, Summer, thank you so much for coming tonight. Pretty straightforward, right? Now I'm going to say the same exact sentence. Summer, thank you for coming tonight. Does it mean the same thing? I'm really grateful you're here. But what changed in the two? Body language. What else? Eye contact and my expression, pitch and tone, all that changed. So let's remember this, and this is one of the more important things that we can hear when we're talking about approaching someone with Alzheimer's and dementia, is that only 7% of the message you convey to someone comes from what you said verbally. 38% comes from your pitch and your tone. And the remaining 55% comes from your body language. So do you commonly think about your body language before you speak to someone? No. But remembering that in middle stage, the connections are breaking apart. Language is harder and harder for me to understand. So I'm really looking at you and everything going on with your body to determine if this interaction is positive or not. Have you ever tried to speak to someone who doesn't speak the same language as you? What do? You get louder for some stupid human reason that we've never figured out, right? But what else do you do? Gestures. What else? Smiling. You grin at each other like idiots, right? Because you want each other to know that the interaction is positive. So one of the best tools in your tool belt for speaking to someone in middle stage is your smile. Because if you're smiling, I know that we're cool. This is going pretty well. Now, this has been harder with masks, right? But if you can smile at someone and remember your pitch and your tone and your body language, you guys, I am anemic, so I'm cold everywhere I go, so I do this a lot. I have to remember to open that up and let go a little bit so that I understand that my body language is going to have a big impact on my approach. So we always want to approach from the front. You never want to walk up behind somebody. Or how about when we do this thing where we're making a sandwich in the kitchen and we holler at somebody and say, do you want mayonnaise or mustard? We've got to stop that. We have to get in front of the person and ask them the question. In addition, when we're approaching from the front, we have to maintain that eye contact, but we don't want to stand over someone. So unfortunately for you, you're the closest person to me, this gentleman in the front. So if we were having an interaction and I'm standing over him, this is an intimidating position. Also, I'm standing directly in front of him. So if he wanted to leave this interaction, he doesn't really feel comfortable leaving the interaction. So you always want to leave an open angle so they can leave. And you always want to get down on their level, whatever that means. It means getting down on one knee, sitting in a chair, and smiling and maintaining eye contact. We call that positive physical approach. Now, when should you argue with someone with Alzheimer's or dementia? There's a time. When is it? I hear whispers. Y'all gonna, I hear never, but there's a time, and the time is safety. So if you can ask yourself, if you're about to argue, and you can say, is this a threat to my safety, their safety, or someone else's safety? And if the answer is no, well, then we shouldn't argue. So if they were to look outside and you see the beautiful blue sky and they say, wow, that sky is just a beautiful shade of orange today. What a lovely shade of orange it is. It is the human condition that we have been all equipped with that little thing called an ego, right? An ego wants to do what? It wants to focus on facts. But now we have to let facts go. Facts no longer matter. Because you could argue all the logic and reasoning that you wanted to argue until you were blue in the face, and because those connections are breaking apart and logic and reasoning doesn't work for me anymore, the only thing I am focused on is feelings. So remembering that avoiding, criticizing, correcting, or arguing is only going to wear you out in addition to wearing them out, and it's going to make your day harder and their day harder. So again, pay attention to your tone and take your time. You're going to hear an example of this from Rebecca, who is a caregiver for her mom.
She could sense my frustration because occasionally I would lose my patience and I would bark at her. Why are you asking me that question again? I just answered that question 2 minutes ago. And then she would get frustrated because, she was very old school and she said, don't disrespect me. And I didn't ask you that question 2 minutes ago. It's a new question. So phase 2 of our relationship was like, okay, that's a new question. I'll answer it again.
So remembering that, as a caregiver, there is frustration, but what we have to do is keeping respect and empathy in mind and remembering that every interaction that's happening, whether it's positive or negative, is happening because there's emotion behind it. So we have to start doing something that I like to call assess, validate, and redirect. So let's break down an example of that. How many of you have ever been around a person, whether you were visiting them at a facility or you were at their home, but you heard them say this sentence, I want to go home? Have you ever heard that sentence? And what is the typical response to that sentence? This is your home. You are home. And unfortunately, that's the worst response you can give. So when someone says, I want to go home, what does that mean? How many of you, when you work all day, where do you want to go? Home. Why do you want to go home? Rest. Comfort. Safety. It's yours. Peace. You belong there. So remember that I have a brain condition in which all my cells are firing, but the connections aren't being made. So I'm frustrated, I'm scared, I'm confused, I'm anxious. And the only relief for that is the feeling of comfort. And I associate that with home. So home is a feeling. So if you say, this is your home, I'm not comfortable. I want to feel comfortable. That's what that means. So it's important that we assess the need behind a statement. So what we have to do is we have to assess that need, and then we have to let them know they've been heard. Ignoring a question is not going to help. So what I typically tell people to do is say, home, tell me about your home. Let's talk about home. What do you miss about home? And then as they start talking, then you have to have a distraction tool, because you validated the brain need, which was home. Now we have to have a distraction. It could be a ride in the car. You could say something like, you know what? You want to ride around and see about going home? Let's go for a ride. Or, before you go home, I brought you a special snack. My tool for my grandfather was mini Dr. Peppers that I kept in my pocketbook, because at their house, Dr. Pepper flowed like water. So I always had a mini Dr. Pepper in my pocketbook. Or the distraction would also be my son, who was 7 at the time. And he thought that the sun rose and set in my 7-year-old son. So the distraction would be him. But it's important that you let them know that they're heard. You may have to employ something called compassionate deception, which is essentially lying, right? But let's pretend that they said, I want my mom. And what do you know about their mom? She's dead. Should you say, your mom is dead? No. You have to employ compassionate deception. What if, let's just imagine, what if your mom died and no one told you? And then when you did find out, they treated it like it was old news. How would that make you feel? Really terrible, right? And you go through grief and trauma all over again. So if somebody says, I want my mom, compassionate deception means, I've heard how nice and lovely your mama is. Tell me about your mama. I'll see if I can't get her on the phone. I haven't seen her in a while. But it's validating it, and then distract with something else, whether it's asking a neighbor to call, another church member to call, a sweet treat, something to distract. Again, using short sentences and basic words, it needs to be direct. This is not the time to bust out a thesaurus. Short sentences, basic words, slowly and clearly, limiting distractions. How many of you have ever been to Chuck E. Cheese? I'm very, very sorry. So no one dislikes Chuck E. Cheese more than me. It's awful. It's really awful. So what happens at Chuck E. Cheese? You go in, and there's about 40 different video games, all with different lights, sirens, buzzers. And then you've got kids screaming at kids, and then parents screaming at the kids. And then you got 3 TVs going with something different on them. And in the back corner, there is an animatronic mouse band that's just playing a cacophony of noise that in no circles could be described as music, right? It's utter chaos. So now I want you to imagine that the Alzheimer's brain is a constant Chuck E. Cheese, particularly at church. Because what do we do at church? Sing, greet one another, we talk a lot, we shake each other's hands. It's a lot going on, right? So remember that distractions can be difficult. Behaviors might be worse when there's too much going on. Communication might be worse when there's too much going on. You have to limit distractions, even if it means turning off the television while you're trying to have a conversation or muting it for a moment. Something as simple as that can make communication and connections easier. So remember that you may have to provide visual cues, write things down for the person, and you should never give someone in middle stage Alzheimer's too much information too soon. So what does that mean? That means if they have a doctor's appointment next Thursday, when should you tell them about the doctor's appointment? Next Thursday morning, right? Because if you tell them about it today, what's going to happen? They're going to get anxious about it, and then they're going to drive you crazy about it, because they're going to ask you hundreds of times, didn't you say I had a doctor's appointment today? When was my doctor's appointment? So remembering too much information too soon is no good. Instead, I urge you to keep a piece of paper by the bedside or a whiteboard in the house or something on the fridge that says what's going on for that day. And if you're going over to visit somebody, don't tell them too much information too soon. Avoid quizzing is important. Quizzing is when somebody walks in the room and say, oh, this is so-and-so, do you remember who they are? Or you show them a photo album and you say, remember when this happened? Remember this? Remember that? That's quizzing. And again, it's just accusations of failures, and we can't do that. So avoid quizzing. So we have to join the person's reality. What does that look like? I'll give you a good example. I had a lady whose husband had frontotemporal dementia. He often had hallucinations. One of his hallucinations, after watching a television series, which blended into his own reality, was that Mexican drug smugglers were after them, and that they needed to flee to Mexico to get away from the Mexican drug smugglers, which didn't make a lot of sense, but what does? And that they definitely needed to call the attorney and make sure everything was squared away. So she could have easily said, drug smugglers are not after us, we're not going to Mexico, and I don't know what attorney you're talking about. But would that validate him? So instead, every morning she got up, and while they were having breakfast, she said, I called the attorney in Mexico. That's all squared away. The doors are locked really good, so no drug smugglers are getting in here. We're all set today. And he felt safer. And he wasn't told that what he knew to be true wasn't real. So remembering joining the person's reality is where we must start. Providing reassurance that they're heard, focusing on the feelings, no facts, and validating and redirecting. Now let's talk about late stage. Late stage is when an individual needs 24-hour care. Communication is going to be reduced to a few words or sounds, or possible familiar phrases. We're going to have to listen for expressions of pain. What might that look like? Pain may look like someone sitting in a chair and rocking back and forth and hitting the side of the chair or picking at their skin or wincing when they're pulled. That's pain, and we want to respond to that promptly. Remembering that people respond to a few familiar words or phrases, the nurses would come into my grandfather's room when he had dementia at the facility and in late stage, and they would say, Mr. Gwynn, are you in any pain? And because my grandfather was a proud man and he was down to his phrases, this was always the response was, it's nothing I can't handle. But I knew that when they left the room and he would move in the bed, he would wince and tears would come out because he had sores on his back and he needed the pain medication. So you're going to have to look for these signs and be the advocate for that person. And keep talking. How many of you in this room are parents? You've had a child? Okay, so when we had the baby, right, did the baby talk when it came out? No. So what did you do? Did you just do this? No, because that's weird. You talked to the baby, right? You talked to the baby, even when the baby can't talk back to you. And that's what we have to keep doing. Even when verbal communication is limited, we keep talking. But now we're going to start using the 5 senses to communicate. So how do we do that? We're going to hear a video from Sandra.
I know that my mom feels aggravated. I know that she feels alone. I know that she feels confused. And I know on any given day, I don't know if I've made it better for her. I try. In these later stages, I've come to recognize that being really aware of the 5 senses is really important. Touch seems to give her a great deal of comfort. I know when I come over, I'm going to brush her hair all the time. My husband noted to me recently, he said, you should see the look on your mom's face when you're brushing her hair. She's just happy. She's just happy. She doesn't say a lot. And I do it for a long period of time. I comb it, I braid it, I do funny things with it, but it just allows me to just be with her in a way that makes her feel comfortable.
So in that way is touch. So it might be something as simple as bringing soft blankets in, or stuffed animals, or different fabrics in, and lay them across them. For my grandfather, I had a really nice fleece blanket that he liked. Could be something like hand lotion massages. You know, even when we're a stranger, I've shaken hands tonight with people that I've never met before, and it's just natural. It's part of something that humans do. So even if you're visiting someone and you shake their hand, you can hold their hand and maybe say, you know what, your hands are a little dry. Let me put some lotion on your hands, and then just rub their hand and talk to them while you're doing it. That touch is important, because in late stage, because so many connections in my brain have disconnected, I'm kind of floating in the ether. And your physical touch grounds me to hear. And grounding me to hear is important. So I was a grandparents' kid. I was at my grandparents' house every weekend that came for many, many years. And one of the things we did at nighttime that was our game was that, you know, at nighttime you got to clean up before bed, brush your teeth, get your jammies on, wash your face. But I'd like to fight that. And we had something called the hot monster, which was them chasing me around the house with a hot washcloth to wipe my face. So when my grandfather got into a facility, and every morning I would get there, and the familiar phrases that were left were, "Why are you doing this to me? I want to go home." And it was just that over and over, and anxiety and frustration and tears. And before we would even get started with anything else, I would just go get a washcloth, put it under the hot tap, rinse it out, and go to him, and I would wipe the corners of his eyes, and I would wipe his mouth, and I would say things in his long-term memory. Because remembering that the short-term memory is gone. So I would talk to him about his long-term memory, and I would say things like, "Thank you for teaching me to swim." And I'd talk about us swimming together. "Thank you for teaching me to drive. Thank you for teaching me to play basketball. Thank you for teaching me to sell furniture." Everything that we did together 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Did you believe 30? Okay. Just remembering that we can connect through touch. And by the time that I was done with that process, he was calm. So touch is important. It could also be something as simple as pet therapy or visiting with animals. If you've got a great, well-behaved animal and you know that there's some folks in the church experiencing Alzheimer's or dementia, take your dog with you when you go see them. You know, let them have a visit. It's powerful. Sight. Brightly colored pictures. Netflix has some amazing programs like Moving Art and Planet Earth. Putting on these programs, they're bright, colorful pictures of nature with wonderful music attached to it. Those are excellent tools and can be a very calming process. Photo albums, as long as we're avoiding quizzing. Bird watching, aquarium, but don't underestimate the importance of just sitting by a window or going outside. Just access to nature is quite important. Connecting through sound. Now you guys, if you have the time, I urge you to Google the 60-minute documentary with Tony Bennett and Lady Gaga. If you haven't seen this, it's powerful. Because Tony Bennett, even in the throes of an Alzheimer's diagnosis, once some of the keys are played and Lady Gaga starts singing some of the songs, he can finish the rest of the song. And that is because even when connections are breaking apart, we hold on to music in our long-term memory. So sound is incredibly important. If you've ever worked with a hospice organization or in a hospice field or talked to anyone in that capacity, you will know that even in the dying process, your loved ones can hear you and they'll encourage you to do this. So it's important when we're talking about familiar music, I don't mean just turn on the radio to any old thing that's on. I mean connecting to them through their long-term memory and music that speaks to them. It could also be reading poetry, reading scripture, the gentle tone of your voice when you're reading out loud. That's quite important. My grandfather was a Sinatra fan, so sometimes when he would get agitated, I'd just turn on my phone and I'd turn Sinatra on and I would just slowly start turning it up. And eventually he would say, "What is that? I know that." And and just to illustrate to you how my grandfather was, at his funeral, we played My Way by Frank Sinatra, which was very appropriate. But sound is important. Smell. Now, individuals with dementia, some forms of dementia, may lose their sense of smell in the late stages. But for folks who hang on to their smell, it's important to communicate through smell, whether it's the smell of outside after it's rained, or freshly cut grass, or coffee, or whatever it is. But how many of you have ever smelled a smell and when you smell it, you think, oh, that's me being little, right? So those are important smells, but it could be something as simple as essential oils, good smelling lotions, flowers, all those powerful smells. And the last sense is taste. Now, this is important because as the late stage progresses, you'll notice that an individual loses their taste buds. And I had a family come to my office, and their loved one was in a facility, and they were quite upset with the facility because they found out that all Mama was eating all day long was a Dove chocolate bar in the morning, the dessert at lunch, and the dessert at dinner. Now, they went on and on about this for about 30 minutes. About their nutrition plan, all the things they've encouraged the facility to do. You know, they went on and on and on. And finally, when they stopped talking, I said, okay, so what's the problem? Well, they didn't like that. And I had to be like, calm down. Hear me out. Your mother is in the late stage of a terminal illness. She can only taste sweets at this point. Give her that joy. Don't take it away from her. Broccoli is not going to cure it at this point. Now, granted, if someone's a severe diabetic, this may be different, but in this woman's case, she was getting caloric intake. She was happy. So, remembering that home baked goods, popsicles, flavored drinks, ice creams, and puddings. My tool in my tool belt for my grandfather was a Wendy's Frosty. If I came in with a Wendy's Frosty, we were going to have a decent time for the first hour I was there at least, till he finished the Frosty. So that's important. Remembering that we have to join the person's reality, and there are going to be parts of this disease that we cannot change. There's some inevitability here that can't be changed currently. We know that the person is still there, and that sense of self is still there, and we have to try to connect to it. Whether it's talking to them about things 30, 40 years ago, whether it's responding as a different relationship than what we are. For example, at the end, to my grandfather, I became someone else. That's fine, because whoever it was, he liked him okay. So just remembering to play that role. Demonstrating respect and connecting through feelings, treating them as the adult that they are. If we're going to visit somebody and we're calling them honey and sweetie and baby, we don't do that. Don't do that. Instead, we call them by their given name and treat them with respect, right? Try to decode those communications, even when it's frustrating. Recognizing the effects of your own mood and actions. And you know what? It's okay to do a walk away. What does a walk away mean? It means if you can feel yourself getting frustrated, as any human would do, say, excuse me, I need to go to the restroom. I always say the restroom because there's always a lock on that door, isn't there? And it's always someplace that you can escape to for 15 minutes without someone really giving you any grief about it. So I always say, excuse me, and just take an exit. Count to 10, listen to a meditation on your phone, listen to a song, read some scripture, whatever it is that will calm you down. Understanding the source of their reactions, and kind of, if it's something that's happening over and over, see if there's a trigger for it. Write down the who, what, when, and where is happening while that's going on. And trying to meet their needs while being soothing and calming is important. So I'm going to skip just for a second and go to this slide to talk about what we do at the Alzheimer's Association. We are a national organization We are available to you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You'll notice in your packet there's an 800 number there. You can call that 800 number and speak to a master's level dementia specialist at any time. If you're experiencing a communication and you've done all the smiling, eye contact, gentle tone of voice that you know how to do and it's still not working out for you, because guess what? That'll happen. You can speak to a dementia specialist and get tips and strategies on how to navigate whatever situation you're in. In addition, if you're looking for resources like a neurologist, a geriatrician, a daycare center, in-home care, we can connect you with these services. Also, we provide support groups and education programs. A lot of those are still meeting virtually, but we're slowly transitioning back to in-person in each community. I think there is one here in Greenwood, but I'd have to pull up the list. And remember that everything we do with the organization is free. It's free and readily available to you. I would like to show you a quick video because we have just like 2 minutes and the video is literally very short. And I'm going to try to show you a quick video. It might not, oh, I'm not connected, never mind. I'll write it down and y'all can look at this. Write down this video. The video on YouTube that you should look up is Naomi Fail. Her last name is spelled F-E-I-L. Naomi Fail. And in this video, it's 5 minutes. She is connecting to someone who is in obvious signs of pain, who's rocking back and forth in late stages of the disease, and she connects to them through music. It is incredibly powerful. I urge you to look it up. So the woman's name is Naomi Fail, and if you type in Naomi Fail, Jesus Loves Me, you'll be able to access that video, and it's incredibly powerful. Probably good we didn't watch it because it usually makes me emotional, and I would like to open it up for any questions that anyone has, and I shouldn't be emotional for that. Any questions from anyone? Yes, ma'am.
When you were talking about the end stages and just cutting down to like chocolate and desserts, is that not part of the body's process of the dying process where they don't have food and the body's going to be
And as that's happening, you're losing that taste, capacity for other things. And if you've ever had a cold where you couldn't taste, what happened? You didn't eat anything, did you? And that's a natural part of the process, correct? Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I know all of us have this worry sometimes that, you walk back to the bedroom to get something, you just can't remember once you get there. At what point do you need to worry about things?
That's an excellent question. So the worry is, what's the difference between typical age-related memory loss and Alzheimer's or dementia? So just by a show of hands, how many of you in this room are aging? Right? The alternative's real bad. So yes, we're all aging. And we can see the physical aspects of aging on the outside of our bodies, right? Like I find myself buying more and more wrinkle creams. And they keep coming in the mail and my husband's like, is this another one? Yes, it is. So we can see that on the outside of our bodies, but our brains are aging as we age. So some typical age-related memory loss, what does that look like? That looks like walking into a room and saying, why did I come in here? And turning around and walking back into the other room. And so the action of walking back into the other room sparks why you walked back into this room. Or how about when you see somebody in the grocery store and you do this and they call you by name and you say, hey girl, what's up? And you have no idea who it is. Y'all, I had a neighbor. And I thought he was new, moved in. And I went over and took him a basket of apples. And he was like, hey, Dori. And I was like, how did you know that? And I didn't say that, but he saw my expression. He was like, we went to school together. And I was like, yes. Hey, man. And then it was like every day for the next 5 years, I was like, hey, dude, what's up? Just too late to ask. So these are typical age things that happen. What else? How about when you can't find your reading glasses and they've been on top of your head for half an hour? You go to your doctor's appointment and you're like, hi, I'm Dori. I'm here for my 9 a.m. appointment. And they're like, that's great, but it was at 8 a.m. yesterday. These are age-related memory loss things. What makes Alzheimer's different is the number one warning sign. The number one warning sign of Alzheimer's disease is memory loss that disrupts daily life. So the keywords here are disrupt and daily. So what that means is I'm no longer able to get through my daily routines without the use of multiple memory aids. So what's an example of a memory aid? Post-its, calendars, phones, but the most common memory aid? You. This is where you'll notice people in your life begin asking repetitive questions, telling you repetitive stories, because they're relying on you as a memory aid. So excellent question. We do have a program called the 10 Warning Signs of Alzheimer's Disease, and we have material on our website at alz.org, which is in your packet somewhere, that you can access that there. Any other questions for me?
What about training? I saw that you have a training thing. Is that appropriate to try to do something?
Absolutely. And if you're ever interested in being trained to volunteer to run these programs in your community as an educator, a volunteer educator, we have a program for that as well. So I'll leave some of my cards here on the table, so if anyone's ever interested in participating in a volunteer capacity in that way, we're definitely in need of volunteers. There's one of me, and I'm covering 18 counties. So definitely need some feet on the ground for people who maybe have experienced this, who have seen this, who know this. So that would be excellent. I want to thank you all for having me tonight. I'll be available at the front if anybody wants to ask me a question that they didn't feel comfortable hollering out in front of everybody. But thank you all for having me tonight. My husband would tell you not to clap. He says it only boosts my ego.